Good morning, everyone. Thank you, a big thank you to everyone who's joining us. I want to thank Leader McCarthy and his team for bringing us all together for these roundtable discussions. This is actually the 9th roundtable discussion to help expose what's in this tax and spend spree that is before the House of Representatives right now that Speaker Pelosi continues to draft behind closed doors. Today, we are going to focus on socialized medicine and some of the provisions in the bill. Every day, though, I am amazed, I'm inspired by the people that are leading right here in the United States of America to modernize our healthcare system, discover new cures and treatments, and save lives. I think about so many advocates and patients that I've met through the years, hundreds of disease and rare disease groups that come to the People's House for an opportunity to share their stories with us. And they have an incredible amount of hope. They hope in the promise of American innovation. Whether it's ALS, Alzheimer's, Huntington's, or another disease, the hope of life-saving treatments and cures is here in the United States of America. And we cannot forget that. We've led the world. America is where hope becomes a reality. So it is critical to our future that we stop Speaker Pelosi's plans for socialist price controls. It's a one-way ticket for China's rise as a biomedical leader in the world, and it will lead to less innovation, fewer cures, and no hope for people who deserve a fighting chance at life. Rather than lurch towards socialist price controls, we should secure America's leadership as the best place in the world to save lives and raise our standard of living. With bipartisan solutions that are included in our legislation, H.R. 19, the Lower Cost, More Cures Act. That's how we win the future. So I'm excited for today's discussion. Let's begin by going around and having everyone introduce themselves. And I'll start with the members. The gentleman from Ways and Means.
Thank you. I'm Adrian Smith from Nebraska, proudly a member of the Ways and Means Committee, where we're doing battle against this agenda from the left. They want price controls. They just want overall more control of our health care, individuals as a whole. And so our work is cut out for us. But I think we've got a good story to tell of what the marketplace has already delivered in terms of more access to pharmaceutical products, for example. And anxious to have this discussion here today. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Brad Wenstrup from Ohio. I'm practicing physician and surgeon for 27 years in Cincinnati, an Army reservist, and served in Iraq. I remember we were with CMS a few years ago as our doctors caucus. I'm one of the co-chairs of our doctors caucus here. And they were telling us how all the things they're implementing are working. And I had to remind her that there's a reason we all ran for Congress as doctors, because they had taken the joy out of taking care of people. And we see this trend towards socialized medicine that is very scary. It will cut out innovation, reduce access to care, all of those things that are so important as patient advocates, as physicians. So I'm glad to be here with our guests today, all three of whom I've gotten to know pretty well, two of them very personally. One I served with in Iraq, and the other's a friend. We went to the same high school, and Mr. Crowley has been more than generous with his time to share his story and his ideas. So glad to have everyone here.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ms. Cathy. I will tell you what, I am Diana Harshbarger from East Tennessee, and I have been a compounding pharmacist for 35 years. And I know a thing or two about safeguarding access to life-saving medications for patients. And, you know, when you look through what they're trying to do to America, it is unconscionable. Everyone should have access to life-saving medications. And as a compounder, I know that firsthand, that we can do things to bring down the price. And that's one of the primary things that Americans want, is lower drug costs. And this is just an issue that we need to discuss today, and I'll lend my expertise to that arena as part of the Doctors Caucus. And John Crowley said something yesterday, and what he said was the primary stakeholder is the patient, and that patient is who we're concerned about. So with that, thank you, Ms. Cathy.
Yes. Doctor.
Thank you so much. I'm Dr. Mariannette Miller-Meeks from the 2nd District of Iowa. I am a physician, ophthalmologist by trade. I was a former nurse, also 24-year Army veteran, and also the former director of the Iowa State Department of Public Health. My foray into politics was started as advocating for patients. I was the first woman president of the Iowa Medical Society, so I made many trips to Congress advocating for more freedom for patients, more choice. And I couldn't underscore what Dr. Wenstrup said earlier, which is how government and how government policy has interfered with the doctor-patient relationship. And a little highlight of what the Democrats are trying to do, really we've seen the past year and a half through the pandemic, where we've had governors make decisions over what drugs doctors can prescribe their patients under the penalty of doctors losing their license. We've seen government bureaucracy interfere with the doctor-patient relationship, whether it's prescribing treatments, what they can get through hospitalization. We've heard stories from people around the country on being refused treatment, whether they're vaccinated or unvaccinated. So this is a real issue when we give the government more control and we undermine what a physician, all of their knowledge, all of their experience, that of our compounding pharmacists, those with healthcare experience, and how they can prescribe the best treatments for their patients. So it's a tremendous concern to all of us, not just price, but also access to care and access to quality care.
Thank you. Excellent. Great insights. Go ahead, Joel.
Good morning. I'm Joel White. I'm the president of the Council for Affordable Health Coverage, a position I've held since 2008. And before that, I was the staff director on the Ways and Means Health Subcommittee and was here during the time that we put together the Medicare Part D drug benefit. And a lot of what's in this bill deals with Part D, which is a very successful program. And I think one of the points I'd make is that we all want lower costs and we all want more access to affordable coverage. And what we've just come through in the past almost 2 years has been an exciting period in American healthcare history. We had Operation Warp Speed. We had an incredible period of innovation. We had a COVID vaccine within 9 months that is really impacting on the ground healthcare, and all of that is at risk. All of that's at risk under this bill because it will flip the switch, get government more involved in our drug pricing and our choices for how we receive our health insurance, and quite frankly, will hamper innovation, reduce choices, and do nothing for the 180 million people who are in employer coverage. So I'm looking forward to this discussion. It's bringing back some fond memories of a long time ago when I was working up here to pull Part D together with many members of Congress, and just appreciate you doing this and the leader doing this.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us. Next, let's go to Joe White. Oh, I'm sorry. John Crowley. That would be good.
Great. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for having me here. I hope you guys don't hear the echo that I do. I think It's gone now.
We're good.
Great. Thank you for having me here. I'm John Crowley. I'm the chairman and CEO and founder of a biotechnology company named Amicus Therapeutics. We founded Amicus 17 years ago. It's the second biotech company I have found on our journey into this world of medicine that began in the fall of 1998 when our two youngest children, Megan and Patrick, were diagnosed with a rare form of muscular dystrophy known as Pompe disease. And we were told there was nothing that could be done, and we went out and found researchers, started a very small company that led to a medicine that saved their lives and became ultimately an improved medicine. And with Amicus, what we've been able to do is focus on building a company, a sustainable business that now researches dozens of rare diseases. And it's exciting. I really believe we are on the cusp of this golden age of medicine. When we look out at the potential of therapies, not only those that have effectively saved lives in the last number of years and decade or more, but in the years and decades ahead. And that's where I'm really concerned about the legislation here that's being proposed. It's not only going to immediately harm people, I believe it'll be a mistake for the ages. And future generations will look back and ask, what did they do? And why did they do it? Biotechnology for me is something very, very personal. And it's a combination of a family journey and a business journey. But as you indicated earlier, it's always been about what's best for people living with these disorders. And the legislation that's being proposed is not the best. I believe it will harm people, it will kill people, it will kill jobs. I also believe we'd be giving up a significant national security interest. If we think China has an advantage with their Belt and Roads program, imagine when they become the medicine chest of the world. And I also think, to Joel's point, very importantly, we need to make sure that we not only make great medicines, but that they're affordable and that everybody has access, 100% access. This will harm access, it will harm health equity, and it'll harm the people who are most vulnerable, the elderly, the people with the most severe diseases. So we're on the cusp of this golden age. We need to make sure we can make these medicines, bring them to people. And the legislation that's being proposed is not the right answer. I think there are much better alternatives to bring pragmatic pricing changes, to reduce out-of-pocket costs for patients, and to increase access. So thank you for having me.
Great. Thank you for joining us. Next, I'd like to go to Mr. Ramaswamy.
Great. I just want to check you can hear me as well. Thank you. So I just want to be the first person to say, actually, I'm honored to be here as well with John Crowley, who is one of the leaders who I've admired for my entire career in the biotech industry, and wanted to thank the rest of you for inviting me to join the meeting. I was the high school fellow alumnus that Congressman Wenstrup referenced, so I was particularly grateful for him including me in this conversation. So what I'll do is I'll just introduce myself briefly, share a couple of thoughts, and note that, as your staff was aware, I wanted to be part of this. I have a travel obligation that requires me to leave at the bottom of the hour, but volunteer myself to be available to all of you as a resource, even bilaterally and outside the context of this room today, to be able to provide whatever helpful advice or perspective I can. I was born and raised in Ohio. I was a biotech entrepreneur. I went to Harvard, studied molecular biology. After that, became a biotech investor for 7 years, after which I left to start a career as a biotech CEO, founding Roivant Sciences, which is a biotech company dedicated to going faster through the drug development process, in part by focusing on areas that the rest of big pharma had not prioritized. The company has developed a range of medicines. Several are FDA-approved products today in diseases ranging from prostate cancer to overactive bladder to a life-saving therapy that was approved earlier this year for an ultra-rare disease. So the company's efforts had spanned a wide range of therapeutic areas and have sold the products to other larger companies that are now commercializing them. So I wanted to just offer a couple of perspectives that I hope are not partisan issues, but are issues that relate to clearly seeing the decisions that we have to make before us. And I think that the issue, as it relates to the implications for drug pricing and innovation, relate to the long-run prospects of the United States as compared to shorter-term political electoral cycles. This is actually an analogy that's drawn in a very different debate, in the climate change debate, where I think a lot of our friends on the other side of this issue would point out the fact that political electoral cycles are too short to be able to match on to the potential, alleged existential threats posed by climate change. I would encourage anybody who sees the issue of climate change policy in that capacity to actually look at our innovation policies in the same light, where though in the short run, there may be certain political and or short-term electoral benefits to taking a look at cost and investment in the system, I think there's a difference between cost and investment for the long run. Now, I think that one of these issues relates to the relative pricing of drugs in the United States compared to pricing of drugs in other countries, an issue that I think is sometimes misunderstood for the fact that actually the United States is subsidizing the development of drugs globally. I can tell you, as somebody who has run the numbers on whether to develop a drug on the front end, if the pricing of a drug were, especially a life-saving drug, were the same in the United States as it were going to be in Europe or other parts of the world, I can tell you in a majority of cases, we would not have proceeded with the development of that medicine. Now, the question that raises for a policymaker is whether or not you use that to get other regions, especially Western Europe and developed economies, to pay more and bear their fair share of subsidizing innovation, or whether you also look at it a little bit in the other way. And a couple of you have alluded to this in your comments already, where actually China is reforming its system in the direction of paying more for innovation. And I think that the problem with building a lighthouse on the one hand is, of course, anybody can use the light. But on the other hand, you also get to decide where that lighthouse is built, the terms on which it's built, what kind of light it shines, how high you build the tower. And I think the United States has always been in that privileged position. And rather than necessarily thinking of ourselves as a victim, we may have an opportunity to think of ourselves as a leader in setting the terms for innovation globally and benefiting from it. And nowhere did I think we see the effect of that more in a more pronounced way than in the development of successful vaccines to prevent the spread of COVID-19. So I think that ought to be a lesson and a wake-up call for us to actually see what may have historically been viewed as a problem of the United States paying more for innovative drugs than other countries as actually an opportunity that, yes, if we build the lighthouse, everyone else can free ride it for free, but we get to build the lighthouse on our own terms. And at times when it matters most, we will ultimately be the long-run beneficiaries of it. That was the first point I wanted to make. And then the second point that I just wanted to leave with you from a note of personal experience is also an issue that I hope can transcend politics of the politics of the situation, which is that regulation actually makes a difference, not just to the safety and speed with which drugs get to market, but also the cost of drugs getting to market. And to that end, I was just going to personally share an experience of mine where a few years ago, my company licensed a drug from a larger pharmaceutical company that had developed a drug for a widely prevalent disease. And the larger company had an agreed upon plan with the FDA to move forward with 2 full multinational phase 3 studies at 2 different doses. So it's a large program. And it may not have made sense to move forward with that program, and they made the decision not to take it forward. We took on the program with the thesis that actually we could go forward with 1 phase 3 program, that it was going to be redundant and wasteful to double that cost. We happened to meet with the FDA, went through that process again, aligned on that program, took it forward. It's now a successfully approved, FDA-approved product that would not have been on the market if the prior plan with 2 full phase 3 studies had been the one that was mandated. Our larger pharma friend and partner would say that the reason we got that treatment was because we were a smaller company. People at my company would argue it was because we had a more rational dialogue with FDA. But whatever the truth of the matter may be on that particular instance, it's an example of a case in which there's a drug that's on the market that wouldn't have been on the market today. It's driving greater competition in that marketplace, which hopefully brings prices down, but would have never materialized if the standard FDA requirement for 2 large phase 3 trials had been implemented. And I think that's invisible to policymakers and it's invisible to the public, but I think is a significant quiet source of deadweight cost on the drug pricing system that we ought to see with clear eyes in a way that I think isn't a political issue, but is actually a regulatory cost that is implicitly impounded in the price of innovation in our healthcare system. So lots more to say. Those were the 2 thoughts that I wanted to humbly share with this group for today. And lastly, I just want to say thank you, because some of you may be familiar with my more recent voice on issues relating to our culture and the recent book that I wrote,
Yes.
Woke Inc. and so forth. But this is actually a pleasure for me to go back to talking about substantive healthcare policy issues from different contexts. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you for joining us. I do recommend Woke Inc., and I've read parts of it and just appreciate your leadership. Thanks for joining us here today. Next, I'd like to turn to Lieutenant Colonel Vladimir Berkovic.
Yes, slight correction, I'm full bird colonel. But it's details.
Sorry about that, Colonel.
Okay.
Got the wrong.
I am a medical doctor practicing family medicine for many years. And I was invited to this conversation. I appreciate, and I've never been involved politically with anything except belonging to our armed forces, which is not a political organization, but it allows me to fulfill my patriotic duties. Now, as a physician, I have a unique perspective because not only I'm practicing, but I also was born and raised in a former Soviet Union. And that allows me come to kind of vision that probably most of you don't have. So when we talk about price control, we start talking about government control and most important, government planning. There's something which was done in the former Soviet Union, and I guess all of us know what's happened to it. It's not sustainable. So when government start controlling they're not professionals. They're not doctors. They're not pharmacists. So they regulate something which most of them don't know much about. So that concerned me. The government control of process concerned me. So saying that, it's absolutely clearly going to cut down on innovation. So, and biotechnology function by few people coming with a wonderful idea, sitting at the table, and then looking for investors. So it's a venture capitals which moves it. Now, if at the end of the day, you cannot make a profit, so what's happening to that venture capitalism? It will be gone. None of us, none of the people who are in biotechnology capable of producing anything unless they have a foundation. And medical ventures, biomedical ventures are very risky ventures. Only few of them usually gets to the top. So investors are very skittish. So if we start telling them that we're going to control the price, I wonder what's going to happen to those people who feeding that economy. I'm pretty sure that will be less and less people willing to take, which is already a risky business. So, and I couldn't resist when I hear people talking about universal access to healthcare and medicine. To me, I would translate it, when you said universal, well, it sounds wonderful. This is what I saw in Russia. It's universal access to medical care. But the question is, how many people have the care? So everyone has access, but very few would have care. So this is what's going to happen when you start cutting the prices on the drugs forcefully. So it's going to crumple economy. The question you have to raise, why we have to change system which are already working? What's the benefits? So there's other ways to correct those prices. There's, this is not the only way. So I would give you an analogy. For example, why pharmaceutical industry should be different from what we have now with electric cars. So no one coming to electric cars and tells them, we're going to control price you can sell your cars. Well, we're going to help that. If we want to have electric cars, we're going to tell the company producing it, we're going to help you. Well, here it looks like it's opposite. Somehow that pharmaceutical industry got vilified and because of high prices. And no one remember that even single drug, I'm not an economist, so I don't know exact price, but usually we're talking about 10 years and $1 billion in expenditure to develop a drug on the market. So, having the government dictating industry what to do, I think drastically reduce access to people to those drugs, and because initiative will be crushed.
Thank you for those insights. What I'd like to do at this time is open this up for a discussion. I think I'm going to ask the first question just to Mr. Ramaswamy because he has to leave, and then allow the members all to take a turn asking a question. But the legislation that we have right in front of us today, perhaps, is H.R. 3. Although it's a compromise of sorts. I wanted to ask if you would speak to this legislation specifically and the impact on the small and medium-sized biotechnology firms in America. Did he already leave? Okay. Thank you. I'm going to turn to then my colleague, Adrian Smith.
Thank you. I think it's important as it's a moving target. Let's face it. Right now, the legislation that is still being drafted, I'm sure, as we speak, and we'll be expected to vote on it, sadly, before too long here, I think, although that's uncertain too. So, but we hear this, negotiation proposed that, and it sounds like such a innocuous term, and yet the government's at the center of all that. And my concern is because the government is at the center of that, it will undermine many successes of Medicare Part D, Medicare Advantage, where access was expanded, has been expanded, gets great reviews by seniors themselves, and we do not want to undermine that. If anything, we should take those principles and spread those throughout. That does include negotiation, but the government isn't, and nor should it be at the center of that discussion. So I'm just interested in what others might have to say about how we can maintain the strength of Medicare Part D, Medicare Advantage for seniors, and perhaps even expand on that without undermining it, as the speaker would love to do as we speak.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I think that, the perspective of this bill is a misunderstanding of Part D and a mistrust of the market, okay? So the misunderstanding is that they go to this little word in the law that says the government shouldn't interfere in price negotiations with the private sector. That was very intentional because the law says the private plans, the experts, the world-class negotiators are the ones that the government has hired to negotiate lower prices, and they're very good at it, right? They get discounts of up to 90% on some of these products, okay? And what this bill says is that we want to swap out those world-class experts at negotiations with Joe Biden and his team. And I can almost guarantee you that there's not people on Joe Biden's team that have negotiated a drug price contract with the president of Merck Oncology or some of these other folks who set the prices. And so it's swapping that out, and what we get in return is a price control. Because what CBO has said is you can't do a better job than these private sector experts from the government. So you have to have a price control. And what they're doing is they're using the VA price system or model to institute a price control, which would get us a lower price, but it comes with a cost. And that cost is less access, less innovation, fewer cures. A price control, because what CBO has said. That was a delay. But so it comes with bad stuff, right? And the market works. We're getting these great discounts. We got under budget. We have 90% approval on this program. And this bill would rip this program up, root and ball, and say we want a different model that trusts the government over the private sector.
If I may, an example of that is look at the Afghanistan withdrawal. And so if you think that it went just swimmingly, then of course you want President Biden and his team to negotiate prices for you on drugs. If you don't think it went very well, then maybe we need to rethink how much of the government we want controlling that. And then let me also go back to the beginning of Medicare Part D as a physician prescribing medications. And if you'll remember at the beginning of Medicare Part D, because we put the patient in the driver's seat, we put the money in the patient's pocket, so the patient could look at drugs, drug prices, where they wanted to get their prescriptions filled. That led to Walmart coming out almost immediately with $4 generic drugs. So the big shift towards generic drugs in order to control prices came because we put the person who was utilizing medications in concert with conversations with their provider to determine what was the most cost-effective for them, what were the most valuable medications for them to use to control whatever disease or disorder they had. And I think you were very instrumental in that, so you probably know that better than I. And then if you look at the cost of Medicare Part D, in 2016, you were about, in 2016, $82.4 billion, in 2019, $70.2 billion. So the cost to the overall program has gone down, not gone up. And drug prices are important, and we need to talk about the whole supply chain of drug prices to increase competition, but not reduce innovation. Americans get 96% of the new drugs that cure new diseases. And I think that's what people are interested in. Do you want your cancer to be cured? Do you want your rare disease to be cured? Or do you want to do what other countries that have price controls do?
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, thanks. I'm thinking back on a patient that came to Washington, D.C., patient of mine, that came to D.C. to advocate for price control on her biologic. And I understood where she was coming from. But this is somebody who I had been treating for probably 20 years or so. And while she was talking about that, I said, well, here's the needle we have to thread. I said, I know you. I know with your rheumatoid arthritis that you were on one medication that helped you for a while, and then it didn't. And then you were on another medication, a new innovative medication that helped you for a while, and then it didn't. And now you're on a biologic that has helped you so tremendously. And patients with rheumatoid arthritis, for example, I used to operate on them. I'd have to reconstruct their feet. They were so deformed. They had so many problems. That went away. I no longer was performing these surgeries. And you look at something like that that saves you in the long run. It may cost a little bit more for the medicine now, but what we are not paying for all the problems that you would be developing otherwise. Hepatitis C, cure for hepatitis C we never thought we'd have. Unbelievable. Oh, but look how much it costs. Today, it might. But over the next 20 years for that particular patient that no longer is going to need a liver transplant someday, this is unbelievable. So we have to look at these things. One of the conversations I've had with Vivek, who left, is he's talking about the cost of your portfolio. And I think, so I want to address this with John, if I could, is the cost of portfolio of how many ideas and potential innovations you have and how many actually make it and make it across the finish line, because that's involved with the cost too of being able to do this at all. And with that also the need for the protection of intellectual property. And so maybe if John, if you could address that, I'd appreciate it.
And no, Congressman, I'm happy to. So in growing Amicus, we started it with a handful of people in 2005. We're now 500 people. We have one approved medicine. What I think is lacking here is an understanding that medical innovation, making biotechnology medicines, is extremely time consuming. It took us from the time we first put our first medicine in a patient in a clinical study to approval 12 years. And it's also risky. We've had many programs that we've spent tens of millions of dollars on where we tried and they just didn't work. And we went back to the drawing board to come up with what's next. So when I think about the one drug that we now have approved, we are taking 100%, actually more than 100% of the revenue of that medicine and putting it all back into research and development in now more than a dozen other rare diseases, including a commitment to the patients in that one disease that we're going to continue to research their disease for better treatments, and we will not stop until there's a cure. And that's what's so important. I had mentioned in a conversation earlier this week that when the movie about our family's journey came out, I had a chance to go around the country and talk about our family and about what it takes to make medicines. And I was joined by Dick Gephardt in that. And Leader Gephardt had described American innovation in making medicines as a virtuous circle that oftentimes it begins in academic centers, involves the NIH, researchers, small companies, big companies, this whole ecosystem that is uniquely American and uniquely successful. But he said something very important. He said that at the center of that is always the patient and what's best for the patient. And if you do that rare feat and come full circle and actually make a medicine, rarely is it a cure. It's an incremental but meaningful step forward that extends life, enhances life, gives a patient, somebody living with a disease, better quality of life and more time with the people they love, time to live life. But it also gives more time to innovators, to scientists like we have in our business, to go back to the drawing board and think, what else can we do? And that's incredibly important, and that's what's unique about it. And so when we build a portfolio, it's an unbelievably risky endeavor, but I can't think of anything more worthwhile. And very importantly, it's the patient at the center. What they're trying to do with HR3 or something similar is to put the government at the center. There are ways in which we can have pragmatic pricing reforms to increase access. Let's talk about reducing out-of-pocket co-pays. We have co-pays because, we've always believed philosophically that somebody getting a medicine should have some skin in the game. I can tell you, people living with a rare disease, any of the rare diseases we work in, they and their families have plenty of skin in the game. Let's reduce co-pays. Let's find faster pathways for biosimilars. There's a lot that could be done. Let's look at value-based outcomes. I'm happy to be paid only when our medicines work. Those competition, innovation, more medicines are what's going to bring down costs, not fewer.
Yeah, if I could add to that, one of the things that we focus on in the Doctors Caucus is not just on increasing lifespan for people, but health span. How do we keep people healthier longer, even with chronic diseases? How do we keep people healthier longer? What they're proposing takes us in a different direction. We want to be preemptive. We want to be able to be diagnostic. We want to be able to treat people sooner because the results are always better. We're in a system right now where, hey, the surgeon who does your open heart surgery, bravo, tremendous skill, save a life, do tremendous thing. But the doctor, like Dr. Berkovich, who's taking care of the patient from the beginning, is not getting much credit because he treats a patient and prevents them from ever needing that open heart surgery. We have to refocus things a little bit too on how we can keep people healthier longer and recognize that we're not just going to take someone when they're broken and fix them, but have them maintain a lifestyle of the best health they possibly can.
Well, and if I can add to that, I think, Mr. Crowley, you said this as well, and that is that in countries where there is government control of pricing and there is that disparity, they also utilize your access to drugs or medications or surgery through a lens of quality adjusted life years. And so what this does, and think about this, if you have a child who's born with a rare disease or a debilitating disease, or you're an individual that develops a cancer and you're at 70 years old rather than 30 years old, the government then is going to determine your access to care by what they value your life. And so if you're a senior citizen, the value of your life is less than if you're a young adult. And in the United States, are we ready to have, in essence, this is rationing of care. It's not, it is not a scare tactic. This is precisely what will be done on the basis of how valuable your life is. And constitutionally, we know that we don't have any second-class citizens, but this sets us up to divide Americans apart into whose life is more valuable, so who gets access to treatment and who gets access to drugs. And I think it is such a discriminatory practice. It discriminates against seniors, it discriminates against disabled, it discriminates against those who may have a disease, who may be able to overcome that disease and then go on to very productive, asset to our community and to our nation.
Mm-hmm. This is a very concerning provision within this proposal as you think about importing quality adjusted life years from European countries that have socialized medicine. It's one of the provisions that is under consideration right now. And excellent point. John, would you expand on that perhaps some more?
Yeah, no, I need to. So what quality adjusted life year is, it's an economic tool where it's measuring disease burden. It's looking at two components. It looks at the data that a medicine generates in clinical studies, and it tries to determine quantity of life, how many more years do you get because of a medicine to live, and quality of life. So it's used to assess, it's a tool, I think a very blunt instrument tool used to assess the value of medicines. The problem with it is, though, if you take the examples that were just given, it discriminates against the weakest and most vulnerable. I think of my children in wheelchairs and on ventilators today. It assumes that their lives, the lives of the disabled, are worth less. It doesn't take into account what we talked about in terms of the revenue that could be generated by new medicines put back into research and development. It doesn't take into account the enhanced productivity of people who receive medicines. It doesn't take into account, honestly, compassion and alleviating enormous amounts of human suffering. I could tell you, we've never done it, but if we ever ran it for my daughter, Megan, my guess is it wouldn't meet the threshold of quality adjusted life in this economic model. But as many of you know, Megan, who wasn't supposed to live to be but a couple of years old, she went on and persevered. Megan graduated from Notre Dame in 2019, decided she wanted to be a social worker. And so she went down, moved to Chapel Hill, and got a master's in social work this past spring. And Megan is a full-time social worker working in a public middle school in New Jersey. And she goes in every day in her wheelchair, on her ventilator, and she helps children. How do you measure that? You don't. And I think, frankly, we take this step forward. I think it's an immoral step that we will come to regret greatly. Again, there's lots of other ways that we can bring down the cost of medicine and increase access. This is not the way to do it.
Right. Powerful story about your daughter. Colonel Berkovic, would you also speak on QALYs?
Yes, I'd like to make a comment on Mr. Crowley made. The comment is that those copay are sometimes showstopper. I see patients day after day, they're coming in, and when you suddenly don't see any progress or they're reversing, and the question is, what's happened? Well, guess what? They cannot, in a literal sense, they cannot afford copay. They will stop their medicine. And another thing I want to mention that it's was brought by Senator, my colleague, that quality of life, it's crucial. It's not how many years you live, it's how many quality years you live. So the preventive care, it's highly, highly underrated. So this is what actually I do in my day-to-day activity. So that is another look and address it. That's what allows us to tremendous savings. As he mentioned already, then people who, for example, I want to give it from my practice. So to me, it's a failure when patients end up in a hospital. So if I can keep patient outside the hospital, it's saving tremendous cost. So if patients go in and out of the hospital because they cannot afford medicine, so that put tremendous cost immediately. So I think we can have to focus on a more preventive approach to medicine than on a kind of fixing what already broken.
Thank you. Diana Harshbarger?
Well, let me tell you, my expertise is in pharmacy, so pharmacy benefit managers, if you want to bring the cost of drugs down, then there needs to be a total review of those pharmacy benefit managers. In order to get specific drugs, and it's just like in some of my notes, when the government begins to price set, it changes the whole dynamics of the private market. And when the PBM tells the drug company, well, you have to pay this much to get on a formulary, and then when physicians prescribe certain medications and they have to go through a prior approval process over and over and go through 3 or 4 drug therapies before they get on the one that works for that patient, you've got to remember those savings, they say that they save the plan sponsor, is not passed down to that customer. We know that. And when we had people come in and talk to us and broke down HR 3, it was phenomenal that there's multi-millions of dollars sitting somewhere that should have been rebated to the patient. It's certainly not coming to the pharmacy, but it's a notice of access that John Crowley was talking about that these biotech companies signed. They want patients to get it. As a compounding pharmacist, we know what the ingredients cost to make certain medications. Why don't they push these newer medications through at a rapid pace? Why don't they repurpose these older drugs to where we can use them, like for COVID or different things? If you follow the money, you're going to find where the problems are. We can save money if we restructure and if the PBM field completely is transparent, and we can show you how, but you can't fix it if you don't understand that problem. It's a shell game right now. And Medicare uses them, Medicaid uses them, and the private sector uses them. And there's much money to be saved when you restructure that.
Joel, would you like to speak about this? And one of the arguments that the majority is making right now is that they want the VA type structure to be applied to Medicare. Maybe just speak to this question.
Yeah, and the add-on comment I would make is that, this legislation repeals the rebate rule, which would have addressed some of those issues that you're talking about. And I think it's pretty well documented that there's you've got a list price that's way up here, but then you take out the rebates and the net price is kind of down here. And if you look at that growth of that net price over the past couple of years has actually been negative. To your question about the VA system, we want to provide world-class health care to our veterans. My dad was a veteran, he died, but both my uncles are veterans, my son's in the Army. I want them to have excellent world-class health care because they sacrificed for us, right? And many people in Iraq and other wars. But the challenge that we see with the VA is Congress, well before this Congress, decades ago, adopted a thing called VA pricing. And it's basically just a price control, and it's based on, this legislation has the same methodology in it. And basically what it says is we're going to have a limit, and then we're going to negotiate a rate below that. So almost identical to what's in this bill. And what the veterans get is about 50% of the top 200 drugs in Part D are available in the VA system. So they only get about half of what's available to our seniors. And that's why 80% of our veterans buy coverage outside of the VA system, because they can't get their drugs in the VA system. And that's the real outrage here. Instead of taking the VA system and applying it to the program that works, we should take the program that works and apply it to the VA. So we've got this exactly backwards, and I think that, that is really needs to be exposed, because if we don't expose that, we'll end up with less access, and like I said earlier, less innovation, and just more problems for people.
Go ahead.
If I can, I'm just going to give a slight example of that. And Representative Harshbarger mentioned about the pharmacy benefit managers and supply chain. And in the state Senate, I passed a bill on transparency for PBMs, and that's certainly an issue of how we can look at bringing the cost of prescription drugs down. But I'm going to relay something to you in my field as an ophthalmologist. So the number one cause of blindness in the United States is macular degeneration, and specifically wet macular degeneration. And throughout almost all the time as an ophthalmologist, dry macular degeneration was better to have than wet, because we had no treatment if there was bleeding under the macula, and you lost the center of your vision. So you couldn't see the faces of your children or your grandchildren. You couldn't drive. It prevented you from reading, although you still had peripheral vision. Well, in the United States, we've developed cures for that with injections into the eye of medications. And in Great Britain, under NICE, which is their interventional program, which determines what medications you can and you cannot get, in the early 2000s, as we were treating people and restoring vision and allowing people to live full and productive lives, Great Britain, on the other hand, limited any injections for wet macular degeneration until you had gone blind in your first eye. So imagine that. I'm not a god as a doctor, but neither is the federal government. Neither is the bureaucracy. And just imagine, I can't guarantee you that your second eye is not going to go blind with treatment. So we treat both eyes in the United States. That's what we've done. It's been very helpful. I have given countless people the ability to have wonderfully full and productive lives, to volunteer, to continue to work, to continue to drive, to continue to interact with their families. And this was after 10 years of all the comparisons with the United States. Great Britain changed their law and regulation. So now, if one eye goes blind with treatment, you have the other eye rather than one eye going blind first, and then we'll allow you to be treated. And that's just an example of what happens under the system they're proposing.
It's
Great
honestly
example.
personalized versus socialized medicine. That's what we need to focus on.
Right. Well, I understand we have a question from a reporter here, so go ahead.
Yes, Sean Moran from Breitbart News. Here we're talking about the implications for the Medicare drug price negotiations, getting rid of the Trump kickback rule with pharmacy benefit managers, and even what the implications have that for our competitiveness against China. But, why do you think Democrats would go to these lengths to try to pass this through the Build Back Better Act and their other reforms with H.R. 3 and that sort of thing?
You want to go for it? Okay.
Sure, if you don't mind.
Yes, please.
No, I think, they want the government at the center. They're calling price controls because they know that terminology doesn't sell among the public, so they call it negotiation. Sounds great, right? But we know that it's price control. And anytime the government with its resources is at the middle, whatever you want to call it, whether it's negotiation or whatever else, it's still government control. it gives them more power than they should have, and especially in the context of healthcare, where we need patients at the center, and with their physicians, with their providers, rather than having to constantly check in with the government.
I would consider it care control is really what they want. And so, like we see with so many things taking place in medicine today, someone who has never seen you as a patient is making decisions about your health care all the time. And this way they have control over, what medicines you can even get. And it's pretty frightening, actually.
And I think Mr. Crowley had also said this earlier. There is a short-term political gain answering a problem that we're seeing right now, which is prescription drug prices are very high, and we want to bring them down. So short-term, you can have a political gain that you may bring down drug prices, but long-term, is that the most effective, most beneficial policy? And is that where we should go?
And bottom line, it's a pay-for. It is a big pay-for in this overall package that is about their transformation of America, their socialist agenda that Speaker Pelosi has said it's a once-in-a-century moment to fundamentally transform America, and this is a big pay-for. So they're raiding Medicare. They're going to take away the funding within the prescription drug program that goes to make sure our seniors have the prescription drugs that they need at that time. Is a big pay-for this overall package. Okay. Anyone else? Adrian, did you have a question? No, okay. Well, I just want to, just a big thank you to everybody who's taken the time to join for this roundtable discussion to really help expose what is in the overall package that's on the floor right now that the majority is trying to ram through. Speaker Pelosi continues to work behind closed doors to finalize this package. We believe it is important for people to know what's in the legislation and how it's going to impact individuals and families and small and large businesses in the United States of America. Speaker Pelosi has said they're going to like it. We disagree. We fundamentally disagree. This is not the will of the people, and I urge people to make their voices heard. And thank you, everyone, for joining us here today. This has been excellent. Thank you to especially those that offered their expert input and insights from real-world experience. Thank you, everyone.